Test, test.
Got it to green. Just push the button to turn it green.
Pick up this far, or we got to move
It's
it?
actually very strong, but you're gonna probably have to move it close. If you speak into it, you can test it.
Test, 1, 2. Test, 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 test. Okay, so you got to get pretty close. Test, test, test. Okay.
Microphone check. Microphone check. 1, 2, 3. Button once and it goes green. That means the mic is live. You might even be able to hear me over the speakers a little bit. So that's how these are going to work, right? And so if you want to mute yourself,
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the Public Works Committee meeting for October 12th, 2021 at 5 o'clock. And we're in the Carnegie Building, meeting in person, but also streaming live. And the broadcast will be taped and posted on the city website. I'm Shannon Most. I'm on City Council, and I'm with Mayor Pro Tem Rudy Zuniga. And we also have our Public Works staff with us today. And we have Vertec, our vendor provider for our trash hauler, and that would be Mike Aragon. And he has with him Michael Heffman in the room. And then we have our residents that are joining the committee for the first time, so that's exciting. What I'm going to do is turn it over to our Public Works Director, Braden Yu, and his staff, and I'd like everyone just to introduce, say your title, and after that, we'll start with the first resident, which would be Carrie, and we'll go this way, and just introduce a little bit about your name, maybe how long you've lived in Upland, and anything else that you want to share or about the committee. So I'll start with our Public Works Director.
Hi, I'm Braden Yu. I'm the Public Works Director at the City of Upland.
I'm Bob Critchfield. I'm the Engineering Manager, Capital Projects for the City of Upland.
Michelle Madriz, City of Upland, Management Analyst.
John Robles, Active Utilities Manager.
Nicole Demoet, Environmental Quality Administrator.
I'm Kerry Leach. I've been a resident of Upland since 1975. I don't know how many years that is. My math was never that good. My passion, I've served on the Upland Veterans Monument Committee since 2015 when it was unveiled, and that seems to be my passion within the city. But I'm also concerned about our infrastructure. I'm concerned about our parks. I'm concerned about the quality of life in the city of Upland, and that's why I'm choosing to serve on this committee.
Right. Good evening, everyone. My name is James Breitling. I am the District 2 representative on this committee. I'm a 14-year resident of the city of Upland. I also serve on the City Council Advisory Committee and am the chair of the Environmental Sustainability Committee. For me, solid waste and recycling is a passion of mine, so this is the perfect committee for my skill set, and I'm looking forward to serving with everyone. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sean Haas. I'm a civil engineer working in Claremont, lived in Upland since 2003. And I look forward to taking the skills I have as a civil engineer and being able to look at projects around the city from that perspective.
My name's Andrew Rubio. I live in District 3. I've lived in Upland for 12 years, and this is all new to me. And I just want to do what I can to help the city and its people.
And I'm Mayor Pro Tem Rudy Zuniga, and I want to thank everyone for being here and welcome all our new guests.
Okay, great. So we have a lot of people to cover some material right now. We have no oral communication, so we're going to go right into the committee member orientation and Brown Act training. I do believe we have our, yes, there he is, City Manager Stephen Parker, who's behind you on the screen. So if you gentlemen need to move your seats, you're welcome to. Oh, is it behind me? Okay. And I did want to say that we also have on the line at a different point, Joanna Jin from our law firm, BB&K. Thank you.
So Stephen Parker here. I think that's my cue to get started. It's good to see you guys remotely. I've been out of the office today, but technology allows me to be with you in this manner this afternoon. I wanted to get to share a little bit about how the city functions. I heard one comment, it's all new to me. You know, this ability that council has given to have more representatives coming to committee meetings and hearing the information that these council members are hearing, and then being able to be these liaisons with the public is so valuable. because it's really not known what a city does and how a city functions and where the responsibilities end at a city and a county in our case the fire is being handled by the county. There's so much lack of knowledge, and I appreciate that you guys have taken up the call to arms and being here representing the public in this way. Carrie, our city clerk, and I are going to be sharing a little bit with you this morning. She'll cover the Brown Act side of things. I'll just give you a little bit of background on how cities run, and feel free and ask any questions as we go through it. So, as Councilmember Moss said, I'm Stephen Parker. I'm the acting city manager here, and let's see what the next slide says, Carrie. So the city of Upland operates the same way that the large majority of cities in California do. It's called the council manager form of government. And in that manner, city council, our elected officials are apprised with ensuring that the policies of the city are established, and they appoint a city manager to handle the day-to-day managerial aspects of the city. The city manager then is in charge of the hiring and firing of all of the employees in the city. City council is in charge of the hiring and firing of the city manager. Our city departments here in Upland, we've been through some restructuring in previous years. Not everyone looks like this, but we're separated out into 4 different departments. So we have directors, department heads, and the first administrative services department. That's before I was acting, that's the role I was taking on as the assistant city manager. I was the department head over administrative services. That's the city clerk, finance, HR, and risk, IT. We also, and community services divisions, also over the library contract and the animal shelter contract. Our development services department is headed up by Robert Dahlquist, our development services director, and he's over the building, the housing, planning, and economic development aspects of the city. And all of those are found in City Hall as well on the other side of the building. The police department is headed up by our Chief Goodman, and they handle anything you would think about as it relates to police matters, their operations side of things. Also the field services side of animal control, and code enforcement is also administered through our police department here in Upland. And lastly, Public Works is headed up by Mr. Braden Yu, right in front of you. And Public Works is responsible for all of the facilities that the city has, all of the utilities that we have, all of the streets, and then any capital project that the city is doing is going to be going through the Public Works Engineering Division. So that's a rundown of what happens in the city. If you can't see something that the city is responsible for in one of those 4 areas, you can ask because everything's being handled by one of those 4 department heads. So the city boards and committees have been established, especially as you guys know from being here recently, to act as a conduit between the citizens and city council. So city council makes that final decision. They are responsible for making those policy decisions and making and having that final answer in that aspect. But they're looking for input. And that input comes through the committee level. And then also we have our different committee members who are helping to gather that information from the public, ask questions, and help give that information to council to make those decisions. So the responsibility of the committee members is to advise and make recommendations to staff. Staff is responsible for bringing information that needs to be under consideration to the committees, and then take that information that's provided from committee members, determine if it needs shifted, adjusted, and make those modifications before it goes on to city council for final decision-making opportunity. What's our, let's see, so the staff liaison, in this case, that's Mr. Yu, is the person who reports to the city manager, and is going to be making that recommendation to the city manager before staff as a whole determines what goes before city council. So for your purposes, you should be asking anything in the purview of what you're looking for in your duties here to that staff liaison. Now that doesn't mean the staff liaison will say, yes, I'm going to do what you're recommending, but they will take that information under consideration and determine the most appropriate response for it. And it might be absolutely pursuing it, and it might be explaining to you why that's not the best course of action to pursue from their opinion, or it might be I'm taking that information and others and I'm combining it together for a new approach. But just want to make you guys clear that any items that relate to your duties by serving on the Public Works Committee, you would want to take through Mr. Braden Yu. And here's a list of our current boards and committees. The legislative ones, like you're on in Public Works, are including Economic Development and Finance, now have 5 new advisory members of the public on them, or if they're not all filled, there's the opportunity to have 5 new. Public Safety, I believe, did not include those new advisory board members, but the legislative ones include 2 council members on each one of those committees. The advisory boards, the advisory committees are made up of just advisory members. No committee members are on those, and those will still have a liaison, as you do, that's helping on the staff side to determine what needs to go on for decision through city council. But this is the list of our both legislative and advisory committees. So lots of opportunities to be involved with the city. If you know of anyone else who's interested, have them reach out to our city clerk because there are still openings and ways to get connected and help serve your community. And that concludes my area. Are there any questions before I go off screen that you have on anything that I covered in the last few slides? And I can't see you, I can only see the slideshow, so I'm gonna assume no unless I hear a voice. Well, regardless if you have one right now or not, you can always feel free and reach out to me with questions, or your liaison, Braden Yu, can help you get any questions answered that you might have. And thank you very much for serving your community through this committee. And with that, I'll hand it over to Carrie.
Hi, everyone. As Stephen mentioned, my name is Carrie Johnson, and I serve as the city clerk here at the City of Upland. And today we're going to go over some Brown Act training. So first, we're going to cover why we have the Brown Act. In 1952, a journalist named Michael Harris wrote a 10-part series for the San Francisco Chronicle called Your Secret Government. And it detailed practices that were common at the time of meetings behind closed doors of local agencies, councils, special districts. And he described how these meetings were happening behind closed doors where important decisions were being made without the public getting the opportunity to participate or comment on the items. And this was inappropriate under the law at the time, but the California legislature decided that the rules need to be made more clear. So Assemblymember Ralph M. Brown authored the Ralph M. Brown Act, and it was signed into law in 1953. Since that time, there have been many modifications and amendments to the act. One of the most recent ones actually addresses social media communications, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the basic premise of the Brown Act is that all meetings of a legislative body of a local agency should be open to the public, and all members of the public should be allowed to comment on any items on the agenda. And this also applies to advisory members of the committees and not just the elected officials. So this leads me to the three basic principles of the Brown Act, which are meetings have to be open to the public, there's an opportunity for the public to be heard, and then transparency in decision making. The act is intended to discourage backdoor deals and include participation from members of the public. So an important part of the Brown Act is the definition of a meeting. The concept is that a quorum or a majority of the members constitutes a meeting of the Brown Act. That's when they're meeting at a designated time and place to hear and discuss or deliberate matters within their subject matter jurisdiction. Meetings also include workshops. So there are exceptions to the Brown Act where the majority of members can gather and they're not considered a meeting. And that includes conferences that are open to the public, meetings of other legislative bodies, and also social or ceremonial events. But even during these gatherings, members of the committee should avoid gathering and discussing any items under their subject matter jurisdiction. There's another time that the Brown Act applies even if you're not all meeting together, and that's called serial meetings. So a serial meeting can happen when one member of the committee contacts another member of the committee and discusses items until a majority have discussed it. One type of these meetings is called a daisy chain meeting. So that would be one member contacts another member, and then that member contacts another member until you've all discussed it. And this can also happen via email. So it's something to be aware of when you're communicating with another member. You don't want to forward that email to a third or fourth member. And then another type of serial meeting is the hub and spoke meeting. And that's where one member of the committee contacts several different members, kind of polling for their opinion on any subject matter item. And this can happen if a third party is also doing this. So it's something that staff can't even do, is contact members before a meeting and kind of get your feelings on an item. It has to be in an open meeting where the public can be present. As I mentioned, the Brown Act recently addressed social media. So communications between committee members applies to emails, and it also applies to phone calls if you're calling and having a conference call, and it also applies to social media. So members of the committee, if one of the members, say James, posts on social media about something that's on the upcoming agenda, and then one of our other members of the committee clicks like on his comments about that item, that's actually a violation of the Brown Act. So you need to be very cautious if you're commenting on any items that another committee member is commenting on. You should refrain from that. And if you're friends on social media and you're commenting on personal things, that's fine. But anything that's city related that's under your subject matter jurisdiction, you should really avoid. So all meetings are required to be properly noticed. And for a regular meeting, that has to be 72 hours in advance. And for a special meeting, that's 24 hours in advance. And the agenda has to provide the time and place of the meeting so the public can attend and make comments. And then it also has to provide a brief description of each item that will be discussed. So if there's something that's not on the agenda that you want to discuss, that can't happen. You can bring it up to your staff liaison and request that be put on a future meeting, but you can't discuss it at the meeting if it has not been listed on the agenda. Another key point in that is that you do have to provide the public an opportunity to speak before anything is decided. So that's why you'll notice on every agenda, there's oral communications at the beginning of the meeting. And that's because they do have to get that opportunity to speak and be heard before you make a final decision. And so we're going to talk a little bit about violations of the Brown Act. So if at some point you feel that there has been a violation of the Brown Act, you should really contact your staff liaison or my office, and we can determine if there really was a potential violation and how we can address the problem. It is the responsibility of a public agency to cure and correct any violation. So that may be if something wasn't properly agendized, it'll be removed from the agenda and discussed in another meeting. Or if something was discussed that wasn't on the agenda, it needs to be brought back at a subsequent meeting and discussed where it's been posted on the agenda properly and members of the public are aware and can make comments of it. And there is a provision in the Brown Act for criminal prosecution for violations. This is only invoked in very unusual and rare circumstances where there's substantial and intentional non-compliance. But this just underlines the importance of the Brown Act and the responsibilities that you have as committee members. So now we're going to talk a little bit about your roles and responsibilities as a committee member. So as a committee member, you should commit to attend to every meeting if possible. If you can't attend, you should let your staff liaison know as soon as possible so they're aware that you're not able to attend the meeting. And then your other responsibility is to really read those agenda packets when they come out and understand what you're going to be discussing at the meeting. And then just to be respectful of the public and the other committee members and give everyone an opportunity to speak. And then the chair, he or she presides over the official meetings. And they ensure that members of the public feel welcome, have the opportunity to speak during oral communications. And then it's also the responsibility of the chair to keep the discussions moving in an orderly process and to move through the agenda items and solicit the opinions of all the members of the committee. So that ends my training. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Are there any questions? Okay, thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Stephen. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
I did get a text from a resident that said if we don't speak into the mics, they can't hear. So I'll try to get it when you do speak, have a microphone in front of you. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to SB 1383 Organic Waste Collection Ordinance Update, and I'll turn that over to Braden.
Yes, our consultant from our legal counsel, BB&K, Joanna Jin, will be making a presentation on the new regulations that we have to incorporate and the ordinance changes that we had to make in order to make ourselves compliant to SB 1386. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Joanna and have her share her screen and so that she can make her presentation.
Thank you, Braden. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I can't turn on my video, but I think that's okay. I will share my screen now. Okay, can you see that okay?
We can see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So my name's Joanna Jin. I am with Best Vest and Krieger, as Braden mentioned, and I have been working to update the 1383 ordinance, which is in the packet before you tonight. Let me see if I can adjust the slide. Okay. So the bill, Senate Bill 1383, which was authored by Senator Lara and signed into law in 2016, established a 50% reduction of organic waste in landfill goal. And by the year 2022, with a 75% reduction by 2025. The bill also directed CalRecycle to develop regulations to implement the intent of SB 1383. And those regulations were adopted last year, and they will take effect on January 1st of next year. The bill SB 1383 also established a goal of recovering 20% of edible food for human consumption that would otherwise go into landfills. And part of the reason for reducing the amount of organic waste in landfills is to reduce the amount of methane gas emissions, which contribute to climate change. So with that, I wanted to provide an overview of the contents of SB 1383. The title of the ordinance was updated to reflect that it now also applies to organic waste. Previously, it was very specific to solid waste or garbage and recyclables. It also states findings and definitions. It also has sections specific to single-family residences and multifamily residences, as well as commercial businesses when it comes to collection requirements. There's also a section on waivers from organic waste collection requirements. Um, the next two sections relating to commercial edible food generators and food recovery organizations applies to the edible food recovery program. There's also sections that deal with haulers and self-haulers and the requirements underneath the regulations. And then finally, at least under the ordinance, there are inspections, investigations, and enforcement obligations by the city. And after I discuss that, I will also discuss next steps and open it up to questions. So the SB 1383 regulations requires the city to provide through BurTech organic waste collection services to all businesses and residences. And currently there is a 3-container service provided for garbage, recyclables, and green waste. And beginning January 1st of 2022, that green waste container will then become an organic waste container. And so both food waste and yard waste or other green waste will be accepted in that specific container. The regulations also require the residences and businesses to source separate their materials. So that means that all garbage goes in that black container, all recyclable materials go in that blue container, and all yard waste and food waste will go into that green container. You can't contaminate the other containers. So that means that any organic waste and recyclable materials cannot go into that black bin, and any garbage can't go into the green bin or blue bin. And if there is a waste generator, someone who creates waste that does put material into the incorrect container, the city could begin issuing fines in 2024. Also, the containers need to have labels on them that specify what goes into each container. And the city also has obligations to educate residences and businesses as to how to source separate and how to reduce their organic waste. I also wanted to discuss the sections on single-family residences. That's simply just what I discussed. For commercial businesses, there are a few other requirements. Under this ordinance and the SB 1383 regulations, a commercial business is defined as what you think of a regular typical business, but it also includes multifamily residential dwellings with 5 or more units. There are obligations for the businesses to inform their tenants of source separation requirements. In addition, actual businesses, not multifamily residential dwellings, must provide collection containers inside and outside a business if there's waste generated to that effect. So for a cafe that generates organic waste, a cafe would need a green waste container inside and outside their cafe. In addition, the commercial businesses also need to kind of self-police and inspect on their premises to make sure that the source separation requirements are being fulfilled. So there are opportunities for certain businesses and property owners to receive waivers from the organic waste collection requirements. That is, they don't have to sign up for organic waste services. These waiver applications would be submitted to the city and granted by the city. So the waivers would include a de minimis volume, and that means that that business does not generate enough organic waste to need a bin. So this would apply if a business has more than 2 cubic yards of solid waste or garbage, recyclables, and organic waste combined, and they generate less than 20 gallons worth of organic waste. It would also apply if they have less than 2 cubic yards of total waste and less than 10 gallons of organic waste. And that only applies to commercial businesses. The second type of waiver is a physical space constraint waiver, and that is if a commercial business or a property owner does not have enough space on their premises to allow for an organic waste container, then they could apply for this waiver if they submit proof. And then third, there's also additional waivers that the city could also come up with as well and do that. All waivers would be approved by the Public Works Director. Okay, so edible food recovery, what is it? Edible food is essentially any food that is fit for human consumption. An edible food recovery program requires certain businesses that sell packaged, prepared, or raw foods and that would otherwise be thrown away and go to the landfill to instead donate that food to food recovery organizations such as food banks. So then those organizations can distribute the edible food to persons who are in need of it and who can consume it. These businesses must enter into agreements with the food recovery organizations to effectuate that purpose. So the city's responsibilities here are really that it's looking out and ensuring that there's adequate capacity for edible food to be donated to certain organizations. So there are certain, are there enough food banks available to handle the amount of food that will be donated or other organizations that can accept that food? And so the city would be responsible for updating a list on its website that has all the organizations that can accept such food. It would also be, the city would also be responsible for any inspection of any contracts or facilities to ensure that food is being donated where it can be. So not all businesses are subject to these requirements. It really depends on whether they meet the definition of a commercial edible food generator, and they are of a certain size. There's 2 tiers. Tier 1, those food generators are supermarkets, grocery stores, food service providers, food distributors, and wholesale food vendors. The regulations apply to Tier 1 generators beginning January 1st of next year. For Tier 2 commercial edible food generators, such as restaurants, hotels, health facilities, all these other venues that sell prepared foods of a certain size, those regulations go into effect for them beginning January 1st of 2024. There are other provisions in the ordinance, haulers and self-haulers, on just what is allowable. It simply means that they have to take all source separated material to the appropriate facilities. The Cal Green provisions and the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance provisions will be addressed separately in the appropriate code sections, and so they're not in the SB 1383 ordinance. In addition, there are requirements to procure recovered organic waste products or recycled products, and they are not in the SB 1383 ordinance. They will later be adopted through a procurement policy. Regarding inspections and enforcement, as I mentioned earlier, fines will begin on January 1st, 2024. But in the meantime, for the next 2 years, the city can educate non-compliant entities or waste generators, and by giving them essentially a notice of violation and encouraging them to comply. And the city would still have to perform inspections, route reviews, waste evaluations, and if applicable, remote monitoring. The penalties that would take effect in January 1st of 2024 would essentially be what is under the existing code provisions relating to administrative citations. So it would be $100 for the first violation, $200 for the second violation, or $500 for any subsequent violation. And ultimately, it is the responsibility for the city to enforce this ordinance. So the hauler, Burtec, could assist by performing the inspections, such as flipping the lids or, to make sure that there's no contamination of the containers. But the city is responsible ultimately for issuing any fines. So the next steps would be for you to forward to the City Council for first reading of the ordinance for October 25th, and second reading would occur on November 8th. And the ordinance, if adopted by council, would take effect on January 1st of next year. Residential organic waste collection service will begin on January 1st of next year. The city will be entering into an MOU with Burtec to delay any rate increases until the appropriate time that a Prop 218 hearing can be held. In the meantime, the city is working with Burtec on an amended and restated franchise agreement. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your time tonight.
Okay, is there any questions for Joanna Jin? Okay, not at this time. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next presentation is going to be on the new reservoir construction and providing an update to what's going on the field site. So I'm going to turn this over to Bob Critchfield, who's in charge of the CIP project over there. And he'll share a presentation on the construction. Yes, go ahead.
One moment. Do we need to make any kind of action move before we move forward? And then just making sure that everyone's good with the ordinance before we would move that forward. I think we have to motion or not motion, but recommend.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm so used to you guys did a good job on the podium.
No, it's okay.
So the recommendation is to forward it to the city council so that we can have a first reading of the ordinances. I do believe Burtec is reviewing it currently. If they have any comments or recommendations, they will most likely get it to us and then we'll incorporate it. But I guess, does that take a vote to you, a motion?
I'm not sure, but I see Sean has a hand up and James has a hand up, so let's go ahead and go. James, you already have a mic in front of you, and then we'll pass it to Sean, just to make sure that the content is fully discussed, and then Mayor Pro Tem and I will take it from there.
Thank you very much. Is Joanna still on the line?
I'm still on the line.
Oh, great. Joanna, I just wanted to say you did a fantastic job going through this and updating the old municipal code and inputting the necessary SB 1383 compliance information. So job well done. I did have one question. You answered many of my questions in your presentation. The procurement policy for paper as well, is that going to be addressed in the other section of the municipal code?
It would need to be addressed in the code. The policy would be outside of the code.
Okay.
And it could address the recycled paper requirements, which are requirements under existing law. The other requirements regarding recovered organic waste products applied to 4 specific products. It applies to compost, mulch, renewable gas, and electricity generated by biomass conversion. And there is an annual procurement target that's established by CalRecycle each year for the city. And so both those provisions would be put forth in a resolution outside the code at a future date.
Thank you. And also, there were
Thank you.
several parts, I'm sorry, there were several sections in the code that it said, for example, the city may choose to comply with section 1328, 660 instead of section 1328, 650. Does the city and the hauler make the decision as to which version, which code set they want to comply with?
Yes, so that would actually depend on data, and by that, the either or provisions are to allow for the city to comply with the standard compliance approach or the performance-based approach. The performance-based approach is more stringent. It requires 90% of all subscribers to subscribe, of all eligible customers to subscribe to organic waste services. And part of the benefit of that is that if there is less contamination and under a specified threshold, certain obligations do not have to be satisfied, such as reporting requirements and certain types of evaluations. However, it's unlikely that the city would meet that requirement, so it's couched as a either or provision so that if if the city does in the future become eligible for the performance-based standard, it could then switch over to that and get the benefits of the performance-based approach.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. This is Sean Haas. I think you've answered the questions within the presentation. I have 2 questions that may fall within staff instead of about the legal perspective of the ordinance. And the first is, if we divert organic waste from households and businesses into this program, and part of the stated intent is to reduce methane emissions from decomposition of that material, where does the organic waste go so that that goal is satisfied? If it simply goes to a holding place, it's going to decompose as well. There have been other municipalities that have benefited from using digesters at wastewater. Okay, so Braden is with me on that, so that they can take advantage of the energy within that organic waste. And my other question would be, if, say, supermarkets, grocery stores find that they have aging products and they want to move them out to a food bank, that's great. They can use it, get it out in the community. What if the food bank can't use it fast enough and it gets to the point where it's spoiled? Because the supermarket's probably going to hold on to it as long as they can until it's almost at that point. Is there an opportunity to incentivize grocery stores and others to get it there a couple days earlier so that there is enough time to get it into the distribution system so that it doesn't just become the food bank's problem instead of the original supplier?
Yeah. So in communications with Burtech, to answer your first question, what will happen is there's going to be 2 streams of food waste. The first will be as bags will be collected for the food waste and going into the green waste bins, they'll be picked up and then they'll be separated and mixed partially in with some of the green waste, develop compost. That is going to be one set of functions for them. The other set of function will be for the, as you said, the anaerobic digestion to develop some type of energy source. I know that there This is all relatively new. I know Burtek has done experiments with that. I'm not sure where they're at. I do know that we have a representative from Burtek here, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with what's involved with that. So again, everything's kind of new, and so everyone's working on developing those type of technologies. I think as time goes on and we see what type of volumes we get, we'll see how it works out financially. I mean, everything comes right down to that, right? As far as the food banks and distribution of edible foods, we actually have a few groups that are doing it right now. We do think that because it's new, as regulations go on, they're going to be overflowed, as you said, overrun. And I think there's even discussions that there's not enough food services that can provide that service. So there's going to be a challenge for everyone to see how this is going to work. I can't say that we can predict the future on this. I do know that we're going to go through our rough patches. And although there's many goals that everyone has, until you start playing around and seeing how it works, I can't answer what's going to happen right away. I think we'll eventually get there, but I couldn't say that we'd get there right away. I think there's going to be challenges that we're going to see.
Thank you.
Okay, so I do have a couple of questions that were raised. The first question pertained to the city, the requirement that the city perform inspections. And my question is, will the city be using code enforcement officers to do those inspections? Will Burtek be utilizing their personnel to go around and do inspections? Or will there be a new group of inspectors hired to go out and go about doing these inspections to make sure that single-family residences, businesses, multifamily dwellings are all in compliance with this new ordinance?
Yeah, so the ordinance is going to be open enough so that we can have either Burtek or our own staff to be able to do it. We wanted flexibility so that we could move depending on whatever happens in the future. At this time, we're probably going to be negotiating with Burtek to perform that level of function and have it incorporated into the rates, because currently we don't have staffing to handle that. And I don't want to add additional staffing until we understand how that auditing process is going to go. So as we start learning more as an agency and seeing how other agencies perform, that is something that we could add in the future. And the ordinance would allow us to add staffing to do those auditing. If it's not onerous, we might even have some of our internal staff be able to do it. But that hasn't been identified yet. We have identified that we'd like to work through Burtek at this particular time to do those inspections.
Okay, then it's hopefully it's not going to take effect where all of a sudden we start getting thousands of citations in the first month of operation of this ordinance, and a lot of our citizens are left shaking their heads wondering what's going on. Where's the money going? Is it going to Burtek? Is it coming into the city coffers? How's it going to be utilized to resolve issues pertaining to this new ordinance? So those are some things that, as long as we're not going to rush in like a bull in a china closet and start,
Yeah, there is going to be a large outreach component, so we have to get people used to the idea of organic recycling. Secondly, the laws don't allow us, and we don't want to, fine anybody until necessary. And so I believe it, as Joanna's presentation showed, that we don't have to do fines until 2024. Our hopes is that our outreach campaign is really going to get people on track, and we don't have to go into that direction. I know there's going to be a few stragglers, like everything else, and at that particular time, we're thinking about it internally of how to appropriately do this because we want to make sure that we give every chance to the community that to correct themselves. So most likely, if we do go to any type of fining, we'd have a first notification, second notification, and probably third would probably be the fine at that particular point. But that's just conceptually at this particular point because we don't have to do it until 2024.
Okay. My second question pertained to Joanna's statement that there was some waivers that would be applicable, and the de minimis volume waiver, for example, I believe pertains to multifamily dwellings with 5 or more units, where they would be allowed to mix the organic waste with their green waste collection. And yet I heard that there's, the ideal situation is the organic waste is going to be placed in bags. The bags are going to be placed in the green waste bins. And for the multifamily community, those collection bins are full-size dumpsters. So are we going to be asking our tenants to take their organic waste bags and throw them in the green waste dumpster, which is currently locked and only accessible to the landscapers? Or how's that going to work?
Well, normal residential is, of course, they're supposed to put in bags and they're supposed to put it with the green waste to avoid contamination. And the reason why, and I'm going to take this portion separate. The reason why is because if they don't contaminate the waste stream, they can divide the green waste into compost and mulch. Mulch is much more easier to produce, doesn't have as long holding period to develop that mulch, whereas compost has quite a bit of time. That's the reason why they want to have the separation. Now, if we do have de minimis customers for apartments, for say, I believe that that waste bin would be identified within the waste stream so that they could separate that and identify that particular haul route to be compost. Okay. So I think there's ways to handle it, but like with everything that's new, there's going to be a lot of experimentation to see what works. I know when we say we're going to start residential organic recycling on January 1st, we look at it more like a soft start. We're going to see how people perform. We're going to watch how our outreach is going to go. We're going to do a lot more communication to make sure that we're performing. But in the same respect, Burtech is also taking a look at this. They've been doing pilots. They've been seeing what works, but they haven't seen it work full scale. And so I think there's going to be a little bit of time that we're going to, I like to say definitively, this is what's going to happen. But I can't because obviously we're going to watch it. But I can say that they are looking at that as de minimis, and when we identify a route, they can separate it accordingly.
I just wanted to add to your first question. Currently, the way the system works without organics being involved, Burtech uses a red tag system where drivers, it's amazing. Well, I used to work for a solid waste hauler, and it was amazing to me how drivers know their routes and they know the people that are on their routes. So when you have a perpetual, or I'm sorry, a habitual violator, people that put paint cans in incorrect bins, drivers were able to identify and know where those places were. So the way they have it, Burtech currently has it. So, if they do happen to notice that there is contamination, what they do is they red tag the barrel. The barrel then the resident would contact, because there's instructions on the tag to contact Burtech, and then they explain to them why, try to create a corrective action so that resident doesn't do that again. And if that persists, then Burtech will and can stop collecting that particular person's particular can that they keep violating until the corrective action is taken. So there's already a course of action that Burtech uses. I'm assuming that we'll just have to expand that process and add some features to include organics.
I have a question about the logistics of introducing this to the city in general. I mean, we're aware of it. A lot of people who watch the news are aware of it, but in general, I don't think a lot of people will realize what's going on until, you know, a new bin comes and suddenly there's a red tag on it saying you screwed up, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. What is the logistics that Vertec or even the city's coming in saying, hey, everyone, this is a new thing. Here it is. We're starting on January 1. You know, December 1, maybe they start, hey, here's what's going on, everyone. You should be a part of this. It's great.
Yeah, we're working, actually, this is a presentation for environmental sustainability that we're going to present. So just to head it off, we're talking about kind of having a three-phased approach on outreach. One is the introduction of the program, two is to keep people on track, and three is to warn them of what the penalties will be moving forward. First phase is what the phase is to introduce the program. Even though it's a soft start, we do want to make sure we get as much participation as possible. We have been in discussions with Vertec as a promotional item. I don't know if you can see, we have this green and gray bin here. Our intention was to have every residential customer receive one with information regarding organics recycling and saying that this is a promotional bin for organics waste recycling that you can capture and then bag and throw it into your green bin. And our idea was to put a QR code on this bin so that they can take a look at it and maybe have a instructional video of what to do. That was kind of what we wanted to kick off. You know, we're hoping also the state's going to help us out by having it advertised kind of throughout the various media. But, you know, it's, whenever you have a program like this, you're constantly going out and doing outreach to get people to go. And then once you see the program going and you know who's kind of performing and not performing based off of the haulers' reports, then we can reevaluate our outreach and cater it to those customers that haven't adopted it yet. We aren't here to penalize the community. We want them to inform the community. So realistically, we think this is the best approach for our community to get them on board. But that was a discussion for environmental sustainability at this time. If you want to hear more, we can go into that at that time. Thanks.
Do we have a projection on what the rates might look like?
Not at this time. As you know, that in order to get this done, we really need to look at a fourth amendment to the contract. And it's pretty significant outtaking. We've already had 3 amendments. And so what we're looking to do is do a restated agreement that incorporates the SB 13 requirements. At this point, the reason why we wanted to defer rates, there's 2 reasons. One is we don't want to have, we just passed a new rate and then have another rate 5 months later hammer the residents. So this gives us a little time to kind of work with Vertec on cleaning up the agreement, not only getting the organic rate incorporated, but also kind of, you know, taking a look at agreement again and see if there's anything that we need to add or subtract from it.
So the city is currently looking at amending the contract then with Vertec.
Actually, Joanna is tasked with updating the agreement as stated in her presentation.
When will that take effect?
We don't think we're going to have it ready before January 1st. Okay. So our hopes was sometime this year, Joanna was going to be able to have a draft made up for staff to review, and then we'll modify to give to Vertec and start the negotiations. It really depends on kind of the negotiations with Vertec, how long it's going to take to get everything incorporated and back to the city for their approval.
So, okay, now I'm going to add, when is the next scheduled Public Works meeting? How many months out is it usually? Is it quarterly or something? January?
Yeah, it's January.
So that kind of puts us right at where the Vertec contract would be coming into play, right? Amended.
Obviously, if we get an MOU to defer rates, we can take it to the January, but, you know, I think likely that we'd take it to the next Public Works Committee meeting after that, which is, I believe, in April.
So I guess what I'm trying to get to is I wanted to have something placed on the next agenda, but I don't know if we're gonna have enough time before this amendment's done. I'd like to have some kind of discussion and over about the recommendations that were recommended to us by R3 Consulting. And I believe that was in 2019. And there was quite a few things that they recommended the city to do, and the city has, I don't think we've done many of them, if any. And
Yeah,
like having a franchise fee. So like if you go, sorry.
yeah, and we've had that discussion with Joanna, and what I can say is that we can bring back what we're recommending, at least a draft portion, back to the committee to go over, and some of the points that we are going to address. And yes, we've had internal discussions about franchise fees and that, and so that is it's on the books and on the table for us.
Which I think would kind of help bring back the rates. You know, if we're getting like, okay, so I have the contract between Eastvale and Burtech, and it's for a 15-year term. Okay, so they're getting a reimbursement of one time of $100,000, franchise fee payments of 8.5%, one-time franchise retention fee of $5 million. So if we can get stuff like this on this amendment that was recommended to us by R3, then it wouldn't hurt, or I don't think it would hit our tax or our ratepayers as hard.
You know, obviously, I think franchise fees are very important. I do think that it should be included if we do not have it, and I do think we should have a percentage. I don't know if it's realistic to say that we're going to add a 10% franchise fee and say that it won't affect rates. I do think it would affect and have it increase into the rates. But, you know, this is obviously on the table for us. It's something that's important. I think the city should address. But we're a little bit early on this because we're just trying to get at least a draft started and getting points done. So we're happy to bring it back on the next meeting and give an update to where we're at and show all the items that we are asking and what Burtech is asking.
Okay, so how do we give any kind of recommendation or direct staff in any way? I know you guys know your job, and I'm not trying to ask you guys or tell you guys how to do your job, but there's some things that I'm concerned about, and I kind of want to see and hope that you all ask Burtech about them at least, bring it up. So is there a way we can discuss this in a meeting, or do we?
Yeah, I think what we can do is when we come back on the next meeting and show addendum for currently what we updated, we can have that discussion of what we're asking for, and if there's anything additional that you want to see or negotiate through, we can definitely do that.
I guess at the least I can ask is if you guys would look at the recommendations from R3.
We're definitely going to look at the recommendations of it.
Hopefully we can get most of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is Joanna. I could definitely, I agree with that. We can incorporate that.
I had requested to the city manager that when you do negotiations, that two council members can be present. So it would make sense, Mayor Pro Tem, if he's available, and myself, to go through that process as well as part of the team. And then if not, definitely have it come back to the committee so that we can kind of flesh that out before it goes to the council. That might help on your end for a timeline.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that message had gotten to you yet and you had received that yet.
I'm sure he sent it to me. I just was obviously very focused on the water rates, unfortunately. But yes, we're going to take into consideration these particular recommendations and also in consideration of your opinions about this.
Right.
Sure.
We'll bring some history with us.
Yeah.
So we need to make a move here, Mayor Pro Tem and I, to recommend. And so the only thing we're focused on for the agenda is just the ordinance as written. So I will ask Mayor Pro Tem if you're good to go ahead and recommend with me this forward to City Council.
Yes, I'm recommending that we forward it.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to agenda item number 4, which is the new reservoir construction update. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Moss. Give me a second to share my screen. So thank you for the opportunity to provide the update on one of our largest projects under construction right now. This is the Reservoir 15 replacement. So a little bit of background here in the city. You see on our first slide here, we have a number of water reservoirs, 4 of those which are not in use right now. And many of these are pretty old. One of our oldest dates back to 1929 and is still in use on 6th Avenue. Our average age of our water reservoirs is about 56 years old. So we have an aging infrastructure out there. The largest reservoir you see highlighted there in yellow is the one that is currently being replaced. It's a 7.5 million gallon tank, and it was originally built in 1976. So the existing Reservoir 15 contains some design flaws. It was a Pritzker tank design. It had 92 precast U panels that make up the perimeter of our tank, and those are secured in place by cast in place tendon ring beams that are located at the top and bottom of the tank. Basically, what that means is back in 1998, a tank featuring very similar Pritzker design elements failed catastrophically, and when that tank fell, there was about 5 million gallons of water that went rushing into the community. So based on that failure, the investigations concluded that it was an inadequate design of the lower ring beam. And we have very similar design elements. It was a Pritzker tank that we have out there at the Res 15 site. So what did we do? In 2018, we didn't want to suffer a catastrophic failure. We worked with Brady and DN Tanks to come up with a temporary hold, so to speak, where we put 0.6-inch diameter steel strands around the tank at specific locations based on structural engineering recommendations to try to avoid a catastrophic failure. This is just a Band-Aid in the hopes that if we did have a seismic event, that we wouldn't have a catastrophic failure. You know, we may lose the wall, but hopefully we wouldn't have a wall of water rushing down, because this is a large tank. And you can see the photo there on the right, some of the leaking that is occurring on this tank right now. So some of the history as far as our costs, our design contract costs, we had to purchase the property from Saco for approximately $1.72 million. We have construction contract costs of $13.4 million. We have construction management and inspection contract with Brady. We have tribal monitoring costs during excavation, so bringing our total to about $17.7 million. We do have an SRF loan, a state revolving fund for $16.5 million. And unfortunately, the state revolving fund does not allow property purchase to be used. So we are in the green there. We just had to pay for the property ourselves. So our construction schedule, the city council awarded the bid to Gateway Pacific in November 2020. They mobilized in March of 2021 and began construction Our over excavation, fine grading, and pad certifications were completed in August of '21. And right now, our milestone 2 is just recently completed, where we formed, rebarred, and poured the foundation and our 4 slab-on-grade pads for the reservoir. Our milestone 3 is under construction right now, which is to form, rebar, and pour the reservoir walls and the reservoir columns. And we anticipate that to be complete in December of '21. Following would be form, rebar, and pour our roof deck quadrants for the roof of the reservoir. And then wrap and shotcrete the outside, which is a subcontractor, DN Tanks, that will be doing that work. And we expect that to occur in April of '22, followed by hydro testing the reservoir, our electrical instrumentation work, some of our pump and piping work. And then we expect to disinfect and fill the reservoir in August of '22. And hopefully about this time next year, we'll have a reservoir in operation. So here's just a project update. This was some of our over X and slab on grade work that was occurring. During the excavation, we had the Kish Nation tribal monitor looking for artifacts, which was a requirement of our CEQA clearance. And we actually did find an artifact. It's the first in my career. It was like a hollowed out rock that we believe they used to, crush seeds and make flour out of. So it's kind of interesting. Then our reservoir slab on grade construction. And then right now we're in the process of forming rebar and pouring our reservoir walls and columns. Change orders to date. This is good news so far. We actually have 3 credit change orders and 1 expense change order. So we're actually in the green right now. So we're tracking well. We have rejected a couple of change orders. That's our job, to look at this and make decisions on behalf of the city, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And we look at the contract, we look at the plans, we go through the specs again, and we make decisions. And then if I could just share, this is about a 2-minute time-lapse video. And it will show the reservoir construction from the beginning through about the end of September, early October. So here you can see the shape of the bottom of the reservoir take place. Now we're getting ready for the slab on grade foundations. And then the slab was poured in 4 quadrants, and those were long days. Now you can see the walls of the reservoir going up there on the left side. And that's about where we are today. So we're about a year away from completion and be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, that's great. I had an opportunity last week to go see this, and it was, if you haven't driven by it, definitely drive by it. It was very impressive, and I learned so much on the tour. I just want to open it up now to see if there's any questions.
How much bigger is it than the old one? It looks like it's much,
It's actually
this
the,
is much more space.
yeah, it's about the same size. They're both 7.5 million
Are they
gallon
really?
tanks.
Okay.
I have one question. The existing tank or the tank that's being replaced, I'm sure at the time it was constructed, was represented as being state-of-the-art construction features, et cetera, and yet we've had design flaws with it. What guarantees do we have that this new tank doesn't have similar design flaws and 15 years down the road or 20 years down the road, we have a catastrophic blowout or something of that nature?
So this tank, we consulted with Brady, who does tanks all around the world. They build tanks 40 million gallon size all around the world, Saudi Arabia. What they do now on these concrete tanks is they actually wrap it from the bottom footing. They have steel that comes up, and then D intakes comes in. They tie in and will wrap and then shotcrete the outside of the tank. And it's our understanding this is the way to build a concrete tank now. And they've assured us that, you know, this is state of the art. They've analyzed the failure in Westminster and they think this is the way to go. So I have to defer to the structural experts. I'm a civil engineer, but I'm not a structural engineer. But I think that would be a
Pre-stress tank.
It is pre-stressed.
And pre-stressed tanks have been in operation for years and years and years. So that's been the common technology. Actually, when he says it's the state of the art, that's just what we're currently using. But it's been around for years and has performed in the years past. And I think a lot of our other reservoirs that have performed are pre-stressed concrete tanks.
When I first got elected to council, one of the first things we did was we contacted the engineer that was part of the building and deconstruction of the Westminster tank. And he came over free of charge and looked at our tank. And the issues that were with the tank that we currently have, there was a lot of flaws in the building of the tank on the side of the contractor, correct? The bottom is not sitting right with the strapping.
Yeah, it's the bottom, but it was actually the design of the tank itself that led to the failure.
Okay, so I was under the impression that there was issues with the contractor itself. The builder didn't build it right. There are other tanks like that around the world that are lasting, but there's just issues with this one and the one in Westminster as well. And he recommended to us that it come down. We build a new one. It wasn't safe. That's what we did.
This is Sean Haas. Just a comment that tank is 45 years old, and most of the civil infrastructure is expected to last 50 years when it's built before it needs a major upgrade. So this one's pretty much on schedule. Good timing, good opportunity to do it before it had a major issue. I did notice in your time schedule that it looks like electrical commissioning is in May next year, and then the first filling hydro test, and then disinfection is in August the same year. Can you explain what the 3-month gap is, why we have to defer that?
There's a lot that goes into the reservoir. There's also pumps that we're replacing. There's a lot of essentially piping around the reservoir that's taking place as well. So this gap, I'm just showing you somewhat of major milestones, but there's a lot in between all of that that's still going on at the same time.
And the other question is 7.5 million gallons of water has to get provided into that tank. Do we have opportunities for getting any type of a discount or any way to take that water at a time of year when it is maybe not as critical or not as expensive?
Unfortunately, water is never discounted in the state of California. And as you can tell by the weather, it's becoming more and more of a rare commodity and a higher commodity. And we've just seen the cost for water supply go up and up and up.
I wanted to add that the tank is safe to hold water, but in the event of an earthquake, that was the issue, correct? So the water moving, they were worried that the tank wouldn't hold up to that.
And this design incorporates a lot of earthquake proofing, like expansion joints and automatic shutdown valves. So there is consideration for that when we put this tank together.
I like that video you did, and I mentioned that day if we could get something on media. That might be a good video with your voice, Braden, kind of overlaying. It's because it's only a 2-minute video, but I think this would be a great little educational blurb for those to know, because this was something that was a big milestone in the city, which leads me into the next item that I'm going to move into, number 5, which is water rate adjustment presentation.
Thank you. And I think Bob has a great studio voice, so I would be more than happy to have him narrate.
Unfortunately, it's not as good as Braden's.
Okay, so before we move on, I need to say that we're recommending to receive and file item 4, new reservoir construction update.
Okay, so the old reservoir will be demolished. And I don't think we're going to have a skateboard parking there either. Okay, to start off, we're going to have a discussion on water rate adjustments. And what I wanted to do is just frame what we do as a water utility. And we really have 2 sets of goals. The first goal is what we do, and the second set of goals are how we do it. What we do is really try to bring water delivery in a reliable way. That means not only do we have to have a reliable source of water, but our system to deliver that water has to be reliable. Obviously, everyone has to have water for use to bathe, drink, use for the lawn and laundry. But we also have to have this available to fight fires and fire services. So a reliable system is what we have to guarantee. And on top of that, we have to bring the highest quality water to the community for public safety. Obviously, we try to meet and exceed state and federal standards so that we can make sure that we have the public's best interests in mind. Now, how we do this is that we strive to deliver outstanding customer service. But I think more importantly, when we talk about rates, we have to do it in a cost-effective manner that brings value to the community. And I want to just point out that as a public utility, that we're a not-for-profit program. Any rate that we cover for the water fund has to go back to water-related activities. It does not go to the general fund. It has to stay here for the ratepayers. So when we look at our water rates, we really look at our water sales and revenue. Basically, what are the components that make this up? We have fixed costs, and those fixed costs comprise of our labor and equipment, our O&M. We also have fixed costs for water supply management. Now, this is not water production. This is the water that we own and how we manage this. We have to buy and purchase water to make sure that we have water for the future. And as we have bonds for the SRF loan for a reservoir, we have debt services. And as part of debt services, we are required to maintain a reserve. So we need to make sure that we have enough money to meet our debt coverage. Currently, our debt coverage needs are about 1.5 times of our annual operation needs, okay? Our second cost is variable costs. And this is when we produce water, we pay for that water, we treat it and deliver it. And if you don't take as much, we don't get as much revenue for this particular portion. Now, these variable water costs, actually water production takes up about 45% of what our sales, our operational cost. So, and operational costs, I really look at fixed and variable costs as our operational cost. Now, before I get into capital costs, I want to show you kind of the outlook of what we produce on an annualized basis. As you can see, it varies from year to year, depending on drought and when we have water shortage or depending on how people use water. And we have a wide variety of water sources. We get state project water from the WFA, which is about 27% of our water. SACO, which is 45% of our water, is very dependent on whether or not it rains a lot and we get flows from the canyon. So that can vary quite a bit. We also pump from groundwater basins in the Six Basin and Chino Basin. And we own about 90% of West End, which we get their shares of Six Basin and Chino Basin groundwater. And you can see the makeup of it, 45% SACO, 27% produced on average is WFA. But when we take a look at what we spend for water, WFA accounts for 58% of that water, and SACO only accounts for 32% of what we spend. Okay, so I guess the question is, why do we have this very mix, and why don't we use the cheapest water that we can? Now, each water source has its own unique circumstance. For example, WFA water is treated by WFA and is a very clean source of water that we can use to blend other sources of water. Some of our groundwater, like from Cucamonga Basin, Chino Basin, a Six Basin, sometimes need to be treated, but sometimes we can treat that by mixing in our clean state project water so that we can make that water available. If we didn't do that, we would have to build treatment plants in order to use those waters. SACO we get from canyons, but we also get Cucamonga Basin water from them. And it comes at a higher area, which we can take, but it's very dependent on whether or not we can get water from the canyons, okay? So each mix helps us build reliability. A diverse source gives us reliability because when one source is not available, another source can step in and take over that. For example, when we can't get canyon water from SACO, we can take WFA water to replace that, okay? It's not that we don't try to always use the cheapest. There's other reasons why we need to use WFA water. And just to briefly go over it, our WFA water is broken up into tiers. We have a tier 1 allocation. We can take up to, I believe it's about 5,300 acre-feet a year from WFA at a tier 1 rate. If we have to go to a tier 2 rate, it's substantially higher. Now, how do we get this 5,200 average? is because we have a 10-year rolling average that accounts for it. So by not using our average can go down and be less available for us. So water management is really about making sure our sources of water and maximizing those sources, okay? In times when we don't, if we don't have rate increases and we need to have better coverage, we will try to change that mix so that we can balance things out. Now this is kind of, I wanted to show you how water is cost to us. And I didn't get every single year of how much everything was purchased, but just to show WFA, on average, since 2012, WFA water has increased about 4.5% annually. Saco water has increased about 4.8% annually. And Chino Basin Watermaster water has increased about 5.5% annually. Now this is higher than inflation. The value of water has increased higher than the value of inflation has been increasing. So it is a commodity that has a lot of value to the community, and that is why water rates get higher and higher. Now, going back to capital, our revenues really should cover our operational costs, which is the variable and fixed, but it also should cover our capital improvement needs. We have about 438 miles of water mains, 12 reservoirs, various wells and booster stations, treatment plants, a whole host of other facilities that we have out there. And just to give you an idea of what it takes to make a replacement, water mains last about 50 years for their service life. If you take 438 miles worth of pipe divided by 50 years, we really should be replacing about 8.5 miles of pipe on an annualized basis. Recently, we had a water construction project. That water portion was about $700,000 for about a half a mile, I believe. If you think about it, just on water pipes alone, for 1 mile of pipe, we're looking at about 1.2 to 1.5 million on a standard 8-inch pipe. And if we're looking at a standard replacement schedule of 8 to 9 miles, we're looking close to $10 million. We need to have capital improvement be covered by almost $10 million just for pipelines, not alone a $16 million reservoir, right? On top of that, each well, if you wanted to replace that, you're looking at about 2 to 3 million per well. So there is a lot of capital costs that people don't think is as important, but it is a very important part. Now, I'm going to show you kind of a rate history. The total water sales is in green. Our operational cost is in red. The operational cost covers our variable costs and our fixed costs. And anything in between is really what's supposed to be covered with reserves versus our capital improvement needs. And you can see the last time we increased rates prior to 2009 was in December 31st of 2005. And in 2009, 2010, we were in the red. I believe when I took a look at the cash, the standing cash in the water fund, we went as low as $3 million before we decided to raise rates in 2014-15. Now those rate increases happened. There was a double rate increase in 2014-15 to get us caught up, and you can see that we're just a little bit over $1 million worth of in the green from our operational costs. Now, what's important is that's the money we're needing to recover our reserves. And we needed time to build our reserves back up so that when we went after the SRF loan, we had enough debt coverage that we could justify that loan. We did several rate increases after that, and I can tell you that it's never popular because we're going to have to not only meet inflation of what we serve, but we have to catch up to get back to a point where we can afford not only the debt coverage, but also the capital improvement needs that we're doing. I think this year we only budgeted about a mile's worth of pipe to be installed. And we're looking, if we were trying to look at a replacement program, we really should be looking at about 9 miles of pipe. We did 1. So if you can see, as we went along, you can see that by 2019-20, our debt coverage, I believe our revenues were exceeding about 4 million of our operational costs. That doesn't really cover our capital costs because in the rate study that we had attached to the staff report, it made a recommendation of having an average of $6 million worth of coverage for future capital expenditures. And it doesn't really meet it, and so we're not spending it towards that. And the other thing I wanted to point out is going back to the water supply. We took cheaper water in the last 2 years and not used our more expensive water, and that is at a cost of our future Tier 1 rate, Tier 1 allocation. Now, I know the state has considerations for drought allocations, and so maybe that water is not going to be available to us. But when it is available to us, it is a very important source. So let's go into what these rate increases that was passed in 2018. It was not. It was quite a bit of an ask because we're asking for quite a bit of an increase. The first increase was going to be about 8.5 for the usage rate and about 11% for the fixed rate. And you can see every year they were supposed to go up another 8%, another 5%, another 3%, until we got caught up so that we could meet our debt coverage, meet our goals for capital improvement. But 2 years, the last 2 years, we decided to suspend rate increases. And, obviously with COVID and with everything that was going on, it was probably the right decision. And you could see that rate-wise, we could cover it. And we covered it for our community. So I don't question that. But as every year comes on, we've made the decision, we made a recommendation, council took action towards it. And we're looking at what would happen if we return back to the rate schedule, which is to go to the rates for 2022. That'd be an ask of almost a 20% increase in rates. I know that's a lot to ask, but that's what's next on the rate schedule. So, obviously we need to bring a recommendation back to City Council. And I know this is not an easy decision for this committee to make a recommendation of what to bring forward to the council. Maybe it's to defer another year. Maybe it's to go back to the regular schedule of 2022. Maybe it's just to go and incrementally increase it back to the 2020 rate of 8.3 and 10.7%, so that we can at least get back on track. Okay. Now, in the future, realistically, we have put into the budget a master plan, water master plan update. And from that update, we're going to reassess our capital improvements that we're going to need. And then after that, we're going to go for another rate study. So I don't believe I can get another rate study done for 2023. But we'll try to go to that direction. But in the interim, I think we still need to progress with something in order to make sure that we don't get back into the past where we get negative in our debt coverages, and also so that we can at least keep up as much as we can, meeting the inflation that we see in not only our water supply, but also the increase in inflation that we're seeing in our costs today. Realistically, we're just asking you to forward a recommendation. I'm not going to make a recommendation for staff because I know this is a very tough decision that needs to be really considered by policymakers. But this time I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so for our residents on the committee, the city manager shared with me today, I asked him how much money's in the water fund. So correct me if I'm, 39.5 million? Or was it 38?
Um, When I had asked for an update on 2021, I thought I saw 29. So if it's at 38, I'll take his word from it because
Stephen Parker, are you there? He might have signed off. Okay. 16.9 million is already allocated for this fiscal year for projects that are in Public Works. And then we have a policy reserve fund, and it suggested, and that was contained in your report, but it suggested to keep 5.3 million in there, so I think of that as a savings account. Because clearly before we started the front-loaded water rates, we were down to 3 million. So it's the fiscal responsibility to keep that at a 5.3 million. And I just wanted you to be aware of those numbers because when you calculate it all out, you're really looking at like maybe 11.7 million. And then I'll open it up to questions, but I'm going to let Mayor Pro Tem go first.
Thank you, Shannon. So the fixed charge, would that be the standby fee?
that's the standby fee, yes.
So where does that money go? Does that go to the water fund? Because
That's all part of the rate structure. It is this, when we show the revenue that comes in, the fixed charge and the usage rate are all part of the revenue that comes in for water sales.
okay, so then we are considering that part of water sales, correct?
That is correct.
And what projects are allocated for the 16.9 million this year?
That's the reservoir project that was,
That's a loan. We took a loan out.
that is for an SRF loan. That is correct.
We have that money, but we didn't use it because we get more in interest if we don't touch it than the 1% that we're spending, paying out on that.
And I want to be full disclosure. I only focused on water sales because water sales is supposed to really cover our operational fees and also our capital improvements. There's other revenues that we do get. Interest, as you say, is one of them. We do get fees for development when they purchase meters. There's meter fees, there's jumper fees, there's various other fees that we have. I did not include that because really that is supposed to go for upsizing capital to meet those new demands that we have. I really wanted to focus on what the rate study had shown.
I don't want to put you in a bad position because those numbers didn't come from you, Braden. But if someone in City Hall is stating that 16.9 million has been allocated out of the 38 million, I don't think that's correct. Because that is a loan and we're paying that back on payments.
Yeah, and
I doubt we're gonna take a lump sum and pay it off.
And I'll be quite frank, I don't know if we've received all the funding yet. I thought we receive it as we go.
So the way the SRF loan works is, once we have expenditures, we submit a reimbursement request. And so we have the cash flow. So there is money in the CIP to cover the cash flow while we get the reimbursements.
Do you have how much money is going to come from the water fund this year for your projects, CIP projects, or any projects? Do you have a rough number of those allocated in the year?
So here's the CIP. So
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't do the calculations, unfortunately, for this.
maybe I can help answer the question as far as the CIP. You know, we have a lot of projects, a lot of street projects, and with those also go the underlying utilities. So sewer, water, storm drain. So we have a lot of projects programmed. We have one on Arrow Highway from Benson all the way over to San Antonio Avenue. We have Alpine, Vernon, and Palm programmed right now. They're in design. So if you look at the CIP, that adds up to approximately 16 million already allocated for projects.
I feel, regardless how I feel about this, we have two other council members and a mayor that should be able to weigh in on this. And that's how I feel. Doesn't mean that I'm voting yes to approve this or anything, but I think my colleagues should be able to discuss this with you all and have some questions asked as well.
So this is Sean Haas, and one of the questions I would ask, and we probably don't know the answer, is how does the city of Upland's water rates compare with other cities and or municipalities in the area? And I know in the past it was extremely favorable. I don't want to bias it, but that might help the discussion to know where we are progressing with other communities. The other question I would ask is, how are we doing on our deferred, or do we have deferred maintenance or other type of capital costs that we expect will be coming down the pipeline? Because in the past, we are, from your graph, it looks like we're still catching up.
Yeah, I have John Robles here, and he can attest to some of the things that we've been doing with our chlorine generation. We have an older chlorine generation program. What we've done in the past is take parts and, you know, Frankenstein thing from other components to make our components work. I believe we just got one chlorine generator updated recently this year. It was about $50,000, and I know that's not a big line item cost, but that's just kind of one of the things that we've been doing. That's just on the production side. On the street side, you know, there's several streets where if you look down the road, you can see little earmarks of, I believe Ninth is one of them, right? Yeah. Ninth Street between Benson and Mountain. You can see that there's been patchwork done because of all the clamps that we have. And what is a clamp? You have a pipeline, you have a leak. They put a steel clamp around that leak, lock it in place, and it's really a Band-Aid. And I know that they have more than 10 on that. Yeah. So there's a lot of infrastructure across the board that we see that we've been managing. Let's put it that way. I'm relatively new to the city, so I'm still learning. And there's a lot of things that, from what I see from my experience with another agency, that I can tell you there needs to be a lot of investment. Going back to your question to, can you repeat your first question? I'm sorry. Oh, the rates?
Sure, the first question had to do with rate comparisons to other municipalities.
When we did this increase, the rate study showed that we were very low, as you said, and we got up to the middle. We have not done rate comparisons with our initial study here. Part of the reason why is when everyone is on different tiers, it's hard to make that comparison because you have to look at everyone's tiers to see if you're correct. And we just didn't have the time enough to do that. So I apologize. But as an agency, we're not alone. I was talking to the general manager at Cucamonga Valley Water District, and they did not increase rate, I believe, in the last 2 years as well. Many agencies are making these decisions for their ratepayers because of the times that we're in, But I just want to kind of restate that there's going to be a cost. We can do 1, 2 year, 2 years. We can't do another 10 years like we had before, okay? And I don't want to get to that point. I think the responsible thing is to do an increase annually so that people can be accustomed to what the new rates in a more acceptable time. They can budget for those increases. And that would be my preference, to at least have some sort of increase.
There was I think it was the graph before this where it broke it down annually. Yeah, that was the one. Was it in 2014, aside from when the rate started, the rate increase began, but thank you. Was there isn't that when the governor declared the drought? And how does the drought affect your business? Because I'm assuming if you are telling people to conserve and they're conserving, that kind of creates a problem. Am I right in my thinking?
Yeah, it was, um, yes, it does, because we take in less water. As we showed, it was about 45% of our water supply accounts for our sales, right? So it does take an effect, and you do see kind of, I think the first, between 2014, 15, 16, 17, a smaller increase of this difference between our operational costs and our revenues. We did another rate increase in 2018, and that this shows a significant jump. But it was a significant increase from the last rate increase. It was literally an 8% increase. So again, I know we're not trying to burden the community. We're not a profit organization. We try to think this very carefully, but we also know that, much like the reservoir, I don't want to see a leak before we take action, and we have to utilize, $1 million to fix it. On 9th Street, I don't want to have 30, 40, water clamps before we take action. I think that's not efficient management of our system. We need to be proactive of how we manage our equipment. And again, I just don't want to fall too far behind.
Is just like I'm seeing a similarity with the I'm seeing a similarity with the solid waste rates. I know that sometimes for the trash bill, Burtech will annually, contractually, they're allowed to come and ask the city for a cost of living adjustment. But they can sometimes decide to skip it. Well, when you skip it, although that's great, but it has to be caught up eventually. Is there a reason or is there a way to keep it at least at a cost of rate living increase, which is what, 1 point, or, well, depends. I know it depends on the year, but just a minimum so we don't fall behind so fast, so far?
When we do things, we don't do things randomly. We had a rate study look into it to propose a responsible way to increase rates. Okay, so yes, I get your question, but when the rate study says, hey, you need to catch up, this is the painful years to catch up, but once you catch up, then you got back to a 3% rate increase, and you can see a more manageable rate increase. That was kind of the intention of the original one. Again, I'm not saying that we can't do the same thing. It's just that, we're showing that we're at a net positive. It's just what is enough for the community, and what can the community tolerate.
Braden, the biggest complaint that I get is the standby fee. Folks are saying that it's too high, and they don't understand why they are paying it. Now, if we decreased or got rid of the standby fee and then allow the rates to go up, to a certain place that would make the city happy, would that work? Or using that standby fee, would that affect us negative?
More and more agencies are looking at the meter rate or the standby rate to cover their fixed costs. So if you think about it, if we just said, hey, standby fee, we cover 65% of our operational costs to make sure that no matter we sell a drop of water or not, at least we can still maintain our facilities. It sounds reasonable, right? But that would make our current standby fee go even up higher. A while ago, I think in 2009, I think they used to have a system where you try to only put a small portion on your standby fee, like 25%, 35%, and then your variable costs were supposed to cover that. Then the drought hit. And what happened was it really affected how water agencies could operate, right? So they started moving towards more onto the standby fee to make sure that we could cover our costs on our fixed cost. That's part of the reason why the standby fee seems so high. It's really to make sure that we have reliability in revenue to cover our operational costs.
So what would a 3-inch line, where would that be? The meter size, 3-inch. Where would that be located? Like a commercial, of course, or would that be our ag?
Excuse me, 3-inch lines are commonly used for industry and large landscapes. And the largest landscape users is the city, by the way, and school districts.
Golf course, correct, the golf course.
And golf course as well. Now, the Upland Golf Course, they have shares in Saco, so they can buy Saco water at a more reasonable price. Well, I wouldn't say more reasonable, at their price point. Okay, so they have that in their pocket.
What size so that would be, would that be considered agriculture? Or these folks that have the small little areas that still have groves, what would that be, a 3-inch meter or smaller?
I think it varies.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you from customer to customer. I apologize. I know that's
It's okay.
more definitive.
It's okay, I'm just curious because I'm looking here at the fixed charges. And I want to also apologize, I may have misspoke on that 16.9 million until Bob clarified it a little bit better for me, so pulled back on that.
So we budget through finance on a year-to-year basis, but in engineering, we kind of plan out more like 5 years for both streets and water, sewer, things of that nature. But it goes to the city on a year-to-year budget basis.
I guess where I struggle moving the recommendation forward is that, so it is 16.9 and it is 5-year forecasting on CIP, and I just think that we owe it to the residents to make sure that they know what money is going to be spent. I mean, it's still unencumbered funds. It's not earmarked because, it's constant changing of projects, especially if there's an emergency. But the intent was to front load the rates for the residents to get the money in there for the water tank situation, which was serious, and then in turn hoping to get the loan, which we did receive. So now we have the loan and we don't really need to start making payments on it for 20 years. Is the urgency now to bring it right now when we're coming out of COVID and situations in the city for what the ratepayers can pay? So to jump back to that chart, which I appreciate, is a consultant recommendation, which I think is paying for the sins of the past, leadership decisions, kick the can down the road, whatever phrase you want to use. I don't want to be in that cycle as well. But to then put on the backs of the residents, 20%, knowing we just finished on the agenda the trash rates. So I just want to make sure that we're very clear that that is included for the residents to know what we have. So, champagne tastes on a beer budget, right? So there's got to be a balance. So I'm not sure where that balance is because this is heavy stuff. So I'm just going to leave it there. I saw Kerry raise his hand, so go ahead, Kerry.
Raised when you cited the problems you've had on 9th Street. You said there were 16 patches between Benson. Okay, so that's 25 to 30 patches between Benson and Mountain, I guess, which is pardon? Between Mountain and 9th on Benson. Okay, so a quarter of a mile, you've got that number of patches, and that's inch line, you said. How many other streets in Upland have water main lines, or whatever, that have similar issues and problems that we're going to have to face? Because you keep putting patches to solve the problem, to maintain the water flow to our residents. But at some point, we're going to be called upon, the city's going to be called upon to go in and correct it. Stop doing Band-Aid fixes, and let's pull out these deteriorating water lines and replace them with new water lines that are going to go into the future. That's going to cost us money.
Yeah, and it's never easy. I brought up this slide to show you kind of our infrastructure. It is an older infrastructure. And so a lot of the pipes that was built originally within the city was bare steel or bituminous wrapped steel pipe. And usually their life cycle is about 50 years, a little bit less depending on whether or not someone else digs and hit or compaction and how that functions. And so what we replace it with is cement mortar lined steel pipe, which has a little bit longer life, at least from what we've seen. So, you know, you're right. I like to say that I have an evaluation on that, but that's what the whole water master plan is supposed to vet out. And what they're really supposed to consider is seeing out all our lines and then making a recommendation of how much we should be replacing on an annualized basis. The last time we did it, I believe, was in 2010, was the update. So yeah, it's about time to re-look at those things. We bring up the 9th Street pipeline because it's foremost on our mind, and we're trying to get it scheduled in for the next round of replacements. You know, once a failure happens, then we know where it is and we can address it at that particular time. I think a responsible system is we look at age, material type, and we proactively replace those pipelines. So we can handle it both ways. Our preference is to be more proactive and show responsibility to the community. The other way, we can be responsible, but it just, you know, it prolongs the issue. I wish I had a better way to say it. I don't have the numbers here, and hopefully in a year when we have that report, we're going to present you with all the pipelines that need to be replaced, and it will better show that.
So one of the questions is, how do you address the rate increases that should be folded into the rate structure over the next couple of years? There was a rate study done, and 2 years were suspended for economic reasons. Completely support that. So is it possible for this committee or for the full council to provide 3 or 4 different phased-in options so that we don't take the last 2 years as a single year increase in next year, but bring that in over, you know, a certain amount of time? I don't know how many more years were left in the rate increase, the schedule to get us to the point where we're on a maintenance 3%.
Well, for ease, we already have a rate resolution passed. And based off of that rate resolution, you could say, well, we want to return to schedule. If you don't want to return to the schedule and go back to 22, you could say, well, we already passed this rate. Why don't we just move forward with the next step, which is the 2020 rate increase? That is a way to address it. If you're not satisfied with that and think it'd be too much of a burden to the community, you know, you can make another recommendation saying that we would like to do a 5% increase across the board in order to better address the community needs. There are several things that this committee can make a recommendation to move forward to the city council, or you could just say that we want to continue this discussion for the city council at the city council meeting, because we really need to make a determine whether or not we are going to defer. Even deferral to say July is an option. And we'd like to defer it till July. There's several options that you guys can do. Now, staff has its preference, obviously, and I think it's very obvious that our preference is to make sure that we have a healthy fund, but these are the tough decisions that you have, so congratulations. Yeah.
So on the recommendation to move it forward to council, that looks like on an agenda, it's just a business item. It's a conversation.
I would present the same staff report to the city council, but on top of that, I would also say that it was presented to the Public Works Committee, and the Public Works Committee made a recommendation to forward it to the city council for consideration. You could make a recommendation that the Public Works Committee forwarded on, making a recommendation to do, obviously, one of several things that you want to do, or for the discussion, yeah.
Well, it sounds like Mayor Pro Tem and I, before we move the recommendation forward, I don't know where you land, but I'm not looking to compound those rates to the residents.
A 20% increase would be fair. If anything, we would start from 2020 or something a little bit more, maybe, I don't know. But this is a discussion that I feel I would like to have with the rest of my colleagues. Maybe they might have a better idea than what we're coming up with now. And it might be something we might be able to go with. Have you all looked into ibank.gov? It's the governor's infrastructure program that they do loans, kind of like the one we got for the water storage.
Yeah, we're looking at a lot of opportunities. IOA has presented us with some opportunities for loans on projects to get us off imported water. So like a recycled water improvement. They want something shovel ready so that they can turn it around. And we don't have recycled water shovel ready. We're going to have internal discussion. Actually, we had a discussion to have a discussion, right? This Thursday to look at some projects that we could possibly do. We were thinking about the conversion of the hospital to recycled water as one of them. It's small, but we're looking at every possibility for loans. Now, just to let you know, part of the reason why we had such a substantial increase in cash was that the city recently won a dispute with, I believe it was Dow, and received about $6 million from that lawsuit. But that $6 million is really dedicated for wellhead treatment. And
So that settlement went into the water fund?
it went into Upland's water fund, yes. So that's probably the reason why when I looked at it initially, it said 29 and you saw 30.
Right.
Yeah, that's probably because it came from the funds that we got received from that. Now, I will say, upcoming, obviously with the drought and the state talking about reduced allocation of state project water, we've been having kind of internal discussions with IUA about water treatment in order to supplement what we get from WFA. If we don't get water from WFA, we really do struggle. And we'll go back to our goals, water reliability. I'm really scared about water reliability. I don't want someone to turn on the faucet and get air. So those are things that we're considering. Treatment's not cheap. And also operationally, it's very expensive. But we're looking to every opportunity. Will a rate increase affect what we do in the future? Probably not, because what we'll do is we'll try to look for grants. We'll try to look for loans. We'll try to do what we've always done, which is be responsible for the money that we have and manage what we have at this particular time. But it makes it more difficult over time, especially bonding, if we don't have the bonding level, the reserves that we need to get better bond ratings. Also, everyone's probably looking for the same projects because the state project water affects everyone in California. So Just something to consider down the road.
Since this committee's responsibility is to advise our council members, let me be the first to share my advice based upon what I've heard from staff, et cetera. I don't believe the citizens of our community would accept a 17.5% increase for usage and a 20% increase for the fixed charges. I don't think that would be acceptable to them. I certainly wouldn't accept it. The original plan was a 10-year plan of rate increases. We suspended it for 2 years. I say we make it a 12-year plan and we pick up at whatever the rate increase was supposed to be for 2020 and then move forward 2 more years and see where we're at that point, because that rate increase diminishes each year for the next 2 years, correct?
That was the intention. It was a 5-year rate increase, and it was supposed to end in 2022. We're in the process to get to the next rate increase, the next rate study, so that we can analyze what we need for the future. So I think that's a perfectly fine recommendation, because you have it based off of a rate study. So it's validated by a report and a study. It's already passed by resolution. And as you said, it probably makes the most sense for the community, and also a balance for the water fund to do something.
I appreciate that comment, Carrie. Anybody else want to make a comment? No? Okay. Well, I really appreciate staff being here with us today and the content that you've given us. It's, a lot to think about, and I agree with Mayor Pro Tem that the entire council needs to weigh in on it. But I think enough has been said today too that, if all of a sudden there's another alternative that you come up with, great. But knowing, and it's great that the residents started with the committee today, because, they're part of that community of, we've went through this when we did the front load rates, and it was a public outcry. And so with all the content that we've given and kind of knowing where at least 2 of us fall with trying to compound the rates, but as a suggestion of maybe starting off, where we were with 2020, because residents will see it as, if you go like a 5, 5, and 3, they add that together, even though we know it's every year. And anything over a 3 is really outpacing inflation. But I do think that we also, if we get the education out and make residents aware, we're really behind. The deferred maintenance is really behind. And it doesn't really matter to a resident until it happens on their street. So with that, I'll ask, is there any further questions before I wrap this up?
When WFA raises their rates, do we pass it through? We're not raising our rates, so we just take it, right? And so how come we don't do more stuff like that when the rates are raised from the suppliers? It goes as a pass-through.
Yeah, it's, I think for us, although it's easy for us to defer a pass-through to the community, I think the community wants reliability in what they see. If we say this is what we're going to give to them, they will expect to see that. And so we've kind of avoided it with costs like WFA to be able to pass that through. On the other hand, I don't want to be hypocritical. A lot of the stuff that we get from IUA for sewer rates or MEU rates and all that stuff, I really want to pass that through, because that's out of our control. This is in our control. We can do a water mix of less WFA water and more Saco water. We do understand there's a price to pay for it, but if we need to, and we need to make sure that we're made whole, we'll do the responsible thing. So I see what you're saying with it, but I think in order to be consistent for the community, because basically, as you can see on this table, their rates have been increasing over the last 10 years at a rate of 4.5%.
Yeah, we have to figure something out here. Because we're like Shannon mentioned, we're gonna fall behind and we're not gonna be able to fix our infrastructure. I'd like you guys to look into iBank, see if there's anything that the city can use. It's ibank.ca.gov. And a lot of cities are benefiting from infrastructure. It's to help repair infrastructure. And I'm not sure what the percentage is. I think it's pretty low.
Yeah, but a grant is great because it's money that is given to the city in order to make improvements, and we don't necessarily have to pay that back. A loan has a payback, and so if we encumber ourselves through the years and we have all these loans in order to get all this infrastructure done, we're going to get to a point where our loan capacity is maxed out, and all we're doing is paying for that loan payment. Well, I mean, we're getting interest, but we're not increasing rates to meet those interest rates. So, yeah.
Will not eventually go up somehow, somewhat. I don't know where they will be. But if we do, just like we did with the storage tank, get a 1% loan, our money's still making a little bit more money than what we're spending.
Yeah, and
So that's the right way to do it. Then to take that whole lump sum and get rid of it, that 16 million still sitting somewhere, making interest.
yeah, and
So why not leave the rest, the majority of this somewhere making interest for us, and we're still paying that a small amount of interest to a loan. I'd like to just look at every option we
sure, sure. I don't want to dispute policy with you. I guess philosophically, I look at it this way. And when we have an emergency, we have borrowing power. And we had borrowing power for this SRF loan, and we did the right thing because we needed to get this reservoir going. And as you can see, well, I didn't show what our cash balances looked like in the past, but if our cash balance was at 3 million, we would not have gotten this loan. And so if we leverage ourselves out in the future, it really limits our ability to borrow in the future when another emergency happens. I mean, for me, and this is just personal preference, I think you have a much tougher decision as policy members to take a look at what's the most best for the community. But I like to say, if we could pay for what our infrastructure needs are now, and then hold that borrowing power for times of emergency, that we really need that money in order to make immediate improvement, I think that to me makes a lot of sense. Now, again, I know that you have a lot more experience with the policy for the city than I do, but that's just my opinion about it. And I just I'd rather share that with you so that you can add to the discussion.
Braden, this is Stephen. Can I be heard well enough right now?
You just scared us all. It's
I'm awake now.
It's like
My
the Wizard of
apologies.
Oz. Go ahead, Stephen.
I'll, always listening, not usually piping in much, but I did want to mention the idea of getting low interest rates as we have through SRF loan for the reservoir, or as the mayor pro tem is identifying iBank could be an opportunity, is fabulous. It's the best case scenario. I'm sorry, the best case scenario is having the cash on hand and there being no cost to removing the cash on hand. The next best is a low interest rate. Currently, interest rates are so low that helps on the borrowing side. Unfortunately, cash on hand hurts in that scenario. So our water fund is not earning 0.5% of interest rate currently because there's nothing we can invest in that will yield that. So while 1%, 1.5% loans, those sound incredibly low, and they are. Right now, our cash on hand isn't doing us good in the sense of earning something that would cost more than borrowing. Obviously, if you could arbitrage and borrow more, that would be the best scenario. The other thing I wanted to point out, as this slide is showing, is that our water costs have been increasing collectively over 5%, or at least over 4.5% per year. So if we were doing, assuming there's no increase in capital costs, which we all know isn't the case and has been exploding in costs during the pandemic, if we were doing a 5% increase in rate year over year, we would just be keeping up with the cost of our water. The capital cost is the real concern with an older infrastructure, and needs to replace that over time. We have healthy reserves. We do have enough to get by in the short term. What Mr. Yu is pointing out is that we don't want to get to the point where we've dwindled those down so much that our borrowing power has been eliminated. I didn't hear. I heard the concern identifying trying to do a catch-up rate is just not palatable, and I can understand that. What we've got ourselves in a pickle is if we don't continue to do little rates that keep up, we're going to find ourselves at some point in the future needing to do something monstrous, which will really upset everyone. So I personally would advocate finding something that is palatable. If that's a 3%, where we know we're not even keeping up with 1 year of water rate increase, or a 5% where we are keeping up with 1 year and we're not catching up anything from the past, or as the committee member mentioned, we're 2 years behind, but go back to the 2020. I would recommend that the committee find something that they would be willing to support moving forward, so we don't find ourselves getting so far behind the situation becomes dire. But the good news is we're not at that dire state currently, so we do have some flexibility in the approaches that we can do.
Thank you.
Yes.
And to correct what I said earlier, because city manager texted me, it's 34.5 million in the water fund. I said earlier 38. I just want to make sure I'm correct on the record. Okay, is there any further comments? All right, well, thank you everybody for being here tonight, and great to have our residents on board. And this will conclude the public work. Oh wait, I first need to move that we are recommending and moving forward to you. I think you have enough content to know what to come back to bring forward for us.
So the recommendation is to bring it to City Council for their consideration, but no recommendation of an amount until further discussion from the council.
Correct. Great. This concludes the Public Works Committee meeting. Everyone have a great night.
Good night.